All right. Has anyone been watching the videos for the individual characteristics of the fruit of the Spirit? A few of you have. And we've been covering, we've done maybe the first 4 or 5. I don't have the list in front of me. If you need a list, it's in Galatians 5. I think it's down about verse 22 or so. We are to, does anybody know which characteristic we're down to?
Patience was the last one.
Patience was, I think, the last one. Goodness is the one that we have come to. Goodness. I am going to, rather than try to tell you how to be good, I'm going to try to give you what I think the author intended. The meaning the author intended, and I think it was generosity. I think that's really what he had in mind when he says, be good, be generous. Is that to start?
I'll get that.
Okay. I want my last check to bounce. Not me, I'm quoting, I'm reading a quote. I want the last check I write to bounce. You know who said that? A billionaire with a B. Billionaire by the name of Charles F. Feeney, philanthropist. He made his fortune in duty-free shopping. My watch I purchased in the open waters of the ocean, duty-free. So I probably helped to his billions. I have no idea. But he began secretly giving his money away in 1984. His goal was to make a difference in the world while he was still alive. He didn't want to wait till he was dead for all his money to do something. He wanted to spend it all while he was alive. It's a remarkable example, of course, and not everybody has that kind of money to give. In fact, many of us view philanthropy as the work of the wealthy. Is it? Yeah, that would be an incorrect view, right? It isn't just the work of the wealthy. Take Albert Lexie, for example. You ever heard of Albert Lexie? My guess is no. Albert started working at Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, cleaning and polishing shoes for $5 a pair. Satisfied customers often tipped him, usually $1 or $2, and he contributed every tip to the Children's Hospital. The largest he ever received was at Christmas. One customer gave him $50 for shining a pair of shoes. That's the most he contributed at one time. In 2013, Albert retired, and during all those years of shining shoes, he donated more than 30% of his earnings and all tips to the hospital's free care fund, which helps cash-strapped parents pay for their children's medical care, and the tips added up to over $200,000. That's pretty astounding, isn't it? Just a little bit can add up. So here is my question to you this morning. What is generosity? What is goodness? Because I'm using them kind of, what's the word? As synonyms, synonymous. Generosity and goodness. What is your definition? It's not always money. It is doing something without being repaid, which is the definition of agape love. Doing something without expecting anything in return. That's the very definition of agape love. Anybody else want to give it a shot? What is generosity? What is goodness?
It is a conviction of the heart to do favorable things.
A conviction of the heart to do favorable things, okay?
think it's just all-inclusive of doing something. You can be good by being receptive to someone who needs to talk.
Okay.
Someone who has an idea, someone who needs help.
It isn't always just giving, it is also receiving. The example being you can be receptive of somebody who needs to talk, offering them an ear, a warm heart, a shoulder. Well, generosity, as was stated, I can tell you what it isn't. It is not about your bank account. It's just not about your bank account. And we know that through the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. So the generous person gives the benefit of the doubt. You know, if you've got somebody here and you're making a judgment, let's say, generosity, goodness, is going to give the benefit of the doubt. It's going to treat others with respect. Most of us equate generosity with financial giving because that's what we hear about. It's what catches our attention. But goodness, generosity, is respect, courtesy, patience. We could go on with a list of things, right? That are good and generous. And it doesn't mean you tolerate everything that comes your way. I don't mean to imply that. I don't want to pendulum swing all the way to an extreme, but it does mean you seek to understand first and react later. That's a big one for us. Really learning, in my counseling, it's one of the things I try to teach first and loudest. Don't react. Reaction is going to get you in trouble many, many times. Don't react. Understand first. Well, for most of us, generosity doesn't come naturally. I mean, do you know an infant that's generous? Oh, you change my diaper anytime, but you can wait till morning. No big deal. I'm hungry now, but whenever it's convenient for you, I'll eat. No, we're born selfish, self-focused, self-centered. That's how we stay alive in those early months, weeks, years. But generosity, well, James chapter 1 and verse 17, you know it well. Anybody want to tell me what it says? The Apostle James 1 and verse 17, every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. Every gift, every good gift comes from God. Our God is a generous God. And our goal is to be more and more like Him. And that's a learned process. We're made in His image. We can take comfort in knowing that generosity is within our reach. It is learnable. It is attainable. You start, though, early. And you start by learning to give when you don't have much. If you want to be a good person, a generous person, you have to start early. Generosity is a discipline that is more caught than taught, I think. We understand it most when we see it in operation. Two of the best examples of generosity in action are found in the New Testament. I bet you can guess the first example. Yes, Mark chapter 12. Be turning over there. Mark chapter 12, beginning with verse 41. That's going to be our first example. Mark chapter 12. Jesus is sitting near the temple treasury. And you know, every time I read this, the more I'm convicted. He's not there by accident. He's there on purpose. They are there, sitting there, watching people give. And his disciples are with him. It's not by accident, right? He wants to teach them a lesson. Someone read us 41 through 44, good and loud, because you're on video and they need to hear you at home.
Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on."
Okay? I'm told there were 13 receptacles in the temple where the Jews brought their taxes and their tithes. 13 receptacles that would resemble today, if I understood what I was reading correctly, they might look like garbage cans to us today. They were made out of brass. And they were designed so, you're giving not paper money, you're giving gold coins or coins of some kind, copper coins, and you put them in there and it bangs and rattles and rolls. At the Mount Carmel Church, during the offering, they have a practice. There's a big, round, galvanized bucket right in front of the pulpit. And all the kids run up there with their coins. And do you think they put them in real soft and quiet and gentle? Oh no, they like to hear the bang, crash, and they rear back and chunk them in there. Guess what the Jews would do when they were giving their money? Because it's kind of important that you be seen and heard doing this, because that makes you a good Jew. So Jesus and his disciples are there watching. And on this particular day, he's watching many people, it says, cast in large amounts of money. And they are wanting to be seen and heard by others. In Greek, the language of the New Testament, the word that we translate as poor, which is describing whom in the story? A poor widow. That is a word that is used to describe someone who is destitute, meaning not just poor, but extremely poor. She is down to her last. This is literally all she has. Who else does that remind you of? What other widow in the Bible? The widow of Zarephath. The one that the prophet is going to come to. She's down to her last little bit of food, and she's going to make a meal, and then she and her son are going to die of starvation. Destitute. And in spite of her poverty, she wanted to give. Now, some people avoid generosity because they have a whole bunch and they want to keep it all for themselves. So they don't give. Others hide behind having not enough. I don't have enough, so I can't give. This poor widow did not hide behind anything. She gave even in her poverty. In the book, God So Loved, He Gave, written by Justin Borger, he writes of his relationship with a homeless woman named Tammy, and this is what he says. He said, "One of my jobs at church is to fill out those slips of paper that we gave Tammy and others to exchange for groceries at the local food bank. The only problem was Tammy liked to share." He says, "Don't give this away," I remember telling her as I would hand her the slip for the food bank. "You need to keep this for yourself. Otherwise, you're going to run out and you won't have anything to eat." Well, living under the bridge meant living with other needy people. And so she let me know that it would be unthinkable for her to return there without sharing her groceries. She said, "So why can't I give some too?" He said, I found myself taken aback. Why shouldn't Tammy be allowed to give some of what she'd received? Wasn't that exactly what I was doing? I paused for a moment, but then I gave her a very pragmatic answer, telling her that our church deacons fund wasn't set up for that. We're giving this to you, I told her. Not everyone else you meet. But I recognize the deeper problem. To only receive and never to give is to be belittled, to be humiliated. The good news is that God has not only made us to be recipients of His grace, but also participants in the movement of His own generosity. He was kind of in a pickle. He wanted to give, but she wanted to give it away. Well, in our story, Jesus says she gave how much? Verse 42. All, but what else? Specifically. Two small copper coins. If you have a translation that tells that it's also called a mite or a what? Okay, we're going to get there. You're going to read my mind eventually. Denarii or denarius. Anybody's translation say that?
It says 1/8 of a cent.
1/8 of a cent. Okay? That the widow places 2 coins is significant. Why? Can you think of it?
She could have one.
That's exactly right. She could have kept one of them. She gave 2, which was all she had. Jesus is not wasting a teachable moment. So he calls his disciples together, beginning with verse 43. This poor widow has put in more than all those who have given to the treasury, for they all put in out of their abundance. But she, out of her poverty, put in all that she had, her whole livelihood. Notice that first phrase. This poor widow has put in more than all those who have given to the treasury. Take a guess, and I don't know how much, but what do you think? Just let's put some numbers out there. How much do you suppose could have been given that day?
Want that in silver or gold?
Combination, because I think it was a combination.
Half a bucket full.
Half a bucket full.
Say half.
Halfway up?
It would be everything you have, it would be,
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah.
You'd have-
If they had 13 receptacles, and there are undoubtedly thousands that were giving that day, I don't have a clue how much money. But I know Jesus' math doesn't add up. 2 copper coins, if you're using math, doesn't equal more than thousands of coins, right? Unless you're using God's math. God's math says what?
Better to give than to receive.
It's better to give than to receive. And God's math says, I don't care what the sum total is. If you gave all, you gave more. 2 copper coins worth half a cent. Right? In sum total? 1/8 plus 1/8, 2/16. No, it's not half. What is it?
A quarter.
A quarter. I failed math, by the way. I got a C. A quarter of a penny. Equals more than whatever the sum total of the thousands of coins would have been. And it's amazing. He didn't say, this poor woman has done splendidly. She did great. He didn't say that. What did he say? She gave more. She gave all. We shouldn't read into this, however. Again, don't let the pendulum swing all the way in the other way. We're not to read that all the other wealthy donors of the day were evil or bad or gave incorrectly. I don't think that's what we're supposed to read into this. Surely some of them had the right heart and gave for the right reasons, to honor God and contribute to the upkeep of the temple and, whatever else they used that money for. But Jesus indicated that the thing of most importance is not how much is given, but the extent to which the gift is a sacrifice. That was what was most important. Is this a sacrifice? A major element of Jesus' teaching is that attitude is more important than the actual action of something, the intent. Her intent to give sacrificially was more important than the act of just giving. Does that make sense? The widow's total giving demonstrates an attitude of absolute trust in God. God is going to take care of me. I don't know where the next meal's coming from. I don't know what's going to happen to me, but I trust God.
Do we really have that trust?
It's a good question.
I wouldn't have given it.
Many of us wouldn't. Because the proof's in the pudding.
Yeah.
I've never given my last cent, all that I have. Well,
You could have reasoned that this quarter cent ain't gonna buy nothing, I'm not gonna give it away.
you could. You could.
Obviously, that wasn't the case, but I'm just saying.
Right.
I'm just saying, that sometimes we think from that perspective.
Because Jesus knew the heart. He didn't just see the action. It might actually be easier for those with less to be generous. That's the lesson I'm learning from this story.
Well, doesn't that go back to it's easier for a man to go through the eye of
Yes.
the needle than it is for a rich man to go
Yes.
to heaven?
Yes. The camel through the eye of the needle. I know what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
yes.
And I think the story of the widow's mite illustrates this truth. Down through the ages, those two minuscule coins have been multiplied into billions and billions of dollars for God's work. Because humble people have been liberated to give of their little because of this story. The Lord converted those two coins into a perennial wealth of contentment and instruction for the Lord's church. And for centuries, it's been shared and taught, and people have given out of their lack and have learned to be good and generous. Let's go to another story before time runs out on me. Can you guess the second story? You did so well on the first. A little bit harder to guess the second. It's in John 12, so be turning over there. The story takes place in the village of Bethany, the town where Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. And on this occasion, a supper is hosted in the house of Simon the leper. No doubt, Simon the leper is a man that Jesus has healed from leprosy, and Jesus is the guest of honor. And according to John's account, Lazarus' sister Mary, who could often be found sitting at Jesus' feet as he taught, is the Mary. John 12 in verse 3 says, she took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard, anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. Everybody using your imagination, you got the picture in your mind? She takes a pound of costly oil of spikenard. She pours it on Jesus' feet. She's wiping his feet with her hair, and the house is filling with the fragrance of the oil. Keep reading, beginning with verse 4. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, he who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. And having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Okay, here is where I had denarii in my head. You were right in the other story with, what was it? Mite or whatever. Yeah, whatever it is. This one is the denarii. In Jesus' day, how much was a denarii? A denarius. It had a kind of a
wage.
a day's wage. Yeah, so it kind of floated.
No, years. That's what mine says.
A
300 denarii was almost a year.
Yeah, almost a year. But one single denarii was one day's wage. So you translate that into modern terms. Again, check my math. At a minimum wage of, and I took a guess, are we at $10.50? That's what I guessed. One denarius would be $84 at $10.50. If you multiply that times 300, what do you get? Approximately 25,000 times 300. Approximately $25,000 in today's money is what she just poured on Jesus' feet. Pretty expensive, right? That's an expensive perfume. How much do you pay for your perfume? I'm guessing not that much. I hope not that much. Yeah. If you use human math, that is a shocking gesture. To open up a bottle worth about $25,000. Karina and I were on a cruise for vacation this last summer, and they had sitting there on the table a card of things you could order. There was an alcoholic drink, one shot.
Yeah.
Do you remember how much it was? $250.
$250, yeah.
And we met a guy. I had 4. No. We met a guy, and he was a plumber, but he had several. That just blows my mind. I don't know how much a shot is. Is it somewhere in that neighborhood?
3 ounces.
3 ounces?
Dang.
How do you know that? 3 ounces.
2 or 3.
3 ounces, and it was like $250. That's expensive. Yeah, a fool and his money are soon parted. It's a shocking. This lady opens a bottle of oil, and it's worth about $25,000, and she pours it on Jesus' feet.
But for someone that loves perfume, that doesn't seem fast.
Jesus, is he upset by it? No. It's almost, and I don't mean to imply he was upset with the others, but it's almost, this is reverse of the story we just had, right? But it's kind of not. She gave what she had. It was the element of the sacrifice. Jesus knew his future. He knew what was coming up. He knew his fate. And so what did he say? Leave her alone. she's done, let's see,
Well, when he commented, that the person that was asked, suggesting this, talking about it, said, you didn't want money, you didn't do this, and you didn't do that. And this person of very bad reputation comes in and pours this expensive perfume on my head. Now,
he knew it was a sacrifice. What a gift it must have been for him to experience the anointing of Mary, of this expensive perfume, getting him ready. He said, and I think we're to read into it symbolically, she's getting ready to bury me. She doesn't know it. I don't think she knew it. But that's the way he is taking it. It's the element of the sacrifice. And it's the element of absolute trust in God. Now you look at these two stories, and by themselves, these are acts of radical, spontaneous generosity. And they challenge our heart. We see them against the backdrop of the culture in which they take place, and the impact is even greater. See, in the Roman world, generosity is regarded as a virtue reserved only for the wealthy, the rich, the powerful. Not the poor. The Latin word generosus, that's probably not how you pronounce it, refers to a person's birth. It comes from the Greek word genesis, which means beginning. Roman generosity is for the elite, the aristocrats. Their culture depended on it. The wealthy act as patrons, funding the work of artists and artisans, as well as commissioning public works, so on and so forth. So it was something only the wealthy did. Neither Mary nor the widow would have been expected to be generous. They were both swimming upstream against the culture, against the custom of their day. Now, as Americans, we like to pat ourselves on the back and repeat the mantra that we are the most generous nation in the world. Our government does give away a lot of money, right? I mean, through time, we have given away billions upon billions of dollars. But that doesn't make us a generous nation. Generous nations are made up of generous people. That money was not given generously. That money was taken. I don't generously give of my taxes. I reluctantly pay my taxes. This, it may shock you to learn that more than 85% of Americans give away less than 2% of their income. More than 85% of Americans give away less than 2%. It's that old standard, and it's been around for a long time. And you can look up the paradox of generosity to find where I got this study. But they have studied and found that more than 85% give away less than 2%. It's that 80-20 rule, which is closer to 90-10 sometimes. It's true in churches. It's true in other organizations. It's kind of a standard across the board that 80 to 90% do very little of the work and the giving. 10 to 20% do most of it. According to a recent study in Relevant magazine, only 10 to 25% of the American people in a typical American congregation tithe. That is, give the biblical starting point of 10% to the church and or the poor. same report concluded that if the remaining 75 to 90% of American Christians began to tithe regularly, global hunger and starvation could be relieved within 5 years. If that's true, why is generosity so hard? Why is what we're talking about so hard? Because we don't trust God. Yeah. Yeah, test me, he says.
I think there's another aspect to it, is that we don't trust man.
We don't trust man. That's exactly right.
The concept of giving is going to rise because of the simple fact there's so much misuse and abuse of it, and we get to the point where we don't trust giving. And it's like asking the question, if I knew this was going to be used properly, I would potentially give more.
Yes.
And so in my life, I found that I have honed in on certain things that I give a whole lot more to because I trust the percentages or the purpose and also the amount that is given to whatever cause it is. And I think that there's the trust of God giving back and also the trust of man using things wisely. And so I think there's two aspects.
Yes, there is. How do we cultivate generosity, goodness in our lives? Let me share with you some ways, practical ways that I came up with. First and foremost, and we have only about 5 minutes left, so I have to do these fairly quickly, but change the way you think about money. Think about from, you held that first paycheck in your hands. Do you remember that? Can you remember your first paycheck? Thinking, oh, what am I going to buy? No, it wasn't that big, was it? That first paycheck, you think of your wages as mine. You earned it through your work. It must belong to you. You bristle at the amount that they withheld for taxes and health care and whatever else they hold out, retirement and all of that. We look at what we actually take home, and for most of us, our first paycheck, we didn't have rent and bills and all of that, but eventually you get there, and when they get done taking stuff out, and you've paid all your rent and your electric bill and all that stuff, and now we're supposed to just give some away to church or people or organizations or whatever. And they didn't work for it. I'm just supposed to give it to them. That's a hard pill to swallow, isn't it? You have to learn it. It doesn't come easily. It doesn't come naturally. The most vital step we take toward developing a generous spirit is turning the way we think about money upside down. When you remember, as James 1:17 said, where do good gifts come from? From God. Every good and every perfect gift is from the Father above. We realize that nothing good is really ours to start with. It's God's. He has given us a gift to be used to glorify Him. And when we start thinking of our money as just one of the countless good gifts from our Father who loves us, you rest in a knowledge that He knows what you need, and He's promised to provide. You think of it this way. You make a pie chart to see where your money's going. And in this paradigm, the amount you have to work with is fixed. It's a paycheck. So you make your pie chart. And each expenditure in every category takes away from the whole until you've used up the entire pie. It's a closed system. There's nothing for you outside that circle. Except God is infinite. God is not bound to a circle, a pie chart. He doesn't work in pie charts. If He's the one who supplies all your needs and He never runs out of supplies, you can stop thinking about your money in terms of a pie being swiftly eaten up like at Thanksgiving, and start thinking of yourself as a conduit of grace. What He gives to us, we can pass on to others without fear that there is nothing left over for us. So change the way you think about money. I only have time for one or two. Expose your heart to the brokenness of humanity. We live in a prosperous nation. We have a welfare system. It's flawed, but it does provide a safety net of sorts to needy people, and it's easy to think that everybody has what they need, but not everybody does. And until you see and know the plight of the needy, you'll never really give to them. But once you do, you're unable to stop. And you don't have to travel across the world to understand the plight of the poor. They're in every American city and across rural America. Chances are good you work or worship with a lot of people who are just getting by and live paycheck to paycheck, and maybe not even that. Open your eyes to see those who are in need and hurting. And very quickly, one more. Before you do big things, do little things. You won't automatically be generous in a day. How about start with generously leaving just a little bit more tip for the waiter or waitress? Do a small thing like that to become more generous. Carry some money specifically with you for those in need. And maybe it's not money. Maybe it's a food, a gift card, or something redeemable for a sandwich or whatever. I mean, we've all been taken, right? You give somebody some cash and they go waste it on something you didn't want them to. Well, learn to give something. Learn to be good, generous. Your final thoughts. My time is up.
I have, most everybody knows my granddaughter Rachel.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we've had her from about the time she was a year old.
Mm-hmm.
And it got to the point that it was kind of funny, and I could say, no, she would, there's a lady in Carbondale that pushes a cart, and I always give her money when I see it. Well, Rachel just took it a little bit farther. When I see somebody and get my wallet out, I start to get some money, and she just reaches over and gets some more. I got mine, and she got hers out of my wallet too. And I said, no, let's wait a minute here. You know, we had to, I said, let's just figure this out. But she was found and determined that she was going to, you know, if I did it, she was going to do it. It was out of my wallet.
She was what? It's caught more than taught. Next week is faithfulness.
Oh, that's cute.
We got our mask on.
Thank you for being here today.